Hello everyone, Grim here, and as you can probably tell, it's time for me to tell you another story. This one is titled, Left Behind, written by the user Darkheroxx and posted to the subreddit r/no-sleep. So as always, sit back, relax, and let's enjoy. I used to drive for Uber on weekend nights in a well-populated city. I had a job as a server in a cafe in the mornings and I didn't really sleep much anyway, so I decided to work for Uber for some extra cash. The money was great and most of my passengers were all extremely kind, so I really enjoyed my job. Driving on the weekends, I'd pick up some drunk partygoers, but those drives always ended with funny stories. Things were going great until the night I picked up this couple. This happened a couple years ago, but I can still remember every detail of that night. I can close my eyes and be instantly teleported back to that moment. It was a little past 1:30 a.m. The relaxing beats from a lo-fi song were playing in the background as I cruised around some of the popular bar areas. I took in a deep breath, taking in the smell of the citrus air freshener I had in my car. It was a pretty slow night, so I decided to call it and make my way back home until I glanced at my phone to see that there was a ride close by. The rider's destination was on the way to my house anyway, so I decided to take it. I left the busy strip and drove towards an empty street a few blocks away. Standing against a stop sign was a man with medium-length brown hair wearing a blue button-down shirt and khaki pants. Standing behind him was a woman with long red hair with blonde streaks. She was wearing jeans and some band shirt. When I drove up to them, I rolled down my window and called out the name that was on my phone. Dave? Dave flashed me a perfect white smile and said, "Yeah, you got me." I unlocked the car while I confirmed the route to take from here, the car shifting a bit as they climbed into the back seat. I glanced into the rearview mirror and got a closer look at them. Dave looked back at me with a big grin and the girl just stared off through the window. Upon closer inspection, I saw that the girl's hair was a bit tousled and her thin round glasses were a bit crooked on her small face. "Everything alright tonight?" I asked. Dave continued to stare at me through the rearview mirror and answered, "Oh yeah, everything is great. Just leaving a date." "Oh, how did the date go?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. I was hoping for the girl to react, but she continued to look out the window as David answered me. "Yeah, it was awesome. It was a Tinder date, so we did the usual drinks here and had dinner there." That threw me off. Where I picked them up was far from any bar or restaurant. I couldn't help but ask, "What were you doing all the way over here?" Dave paused for a moment, never breaking eye contact with me from the mirror. "We took a walk after dinner to get some steps in, you know?" I'm not sure why, but looking at the girl gave me a sense of unease. I was worried because she just didn't look good, and something about Dave was weirding me out. I asked if they were okay and if they needed anything, but Dave assured me that things were fine. The girl didn't react, so maybe I was just overthinking. I continued the drive. It was only about 20 minutes, but the awkward silence made it feel like an eternity. Then we finally approached an area I was familiar with after dropping off some people at some nearby apartments. "Hey, you can just drop me off here," David spoke suddenly. We were in the middle of the street and a few blocks away from where he'd set his destination. Are you sure?" I asked. Yeah, I just need to stretch my legs." He opened the door and I looked to see he had given me a great tip along with a 5-star review. I chuckled to myself as I thought about how weird he was. I heard the car door shut, and at that I was finally ready to go home. I drove for a moment until I heard something right behind me. It was the sound of a woman sobbing. My eyes shot back to the rearview mirror, and sure enough, that girl was still sitting in the back seat. tears rolling down her cheeks as she looked out the window. I slammed on my brake and let out a few choice words in my shock at seeing her. What the hell was this girl still doing in my car? I took a moment to catch my breath and calmly looked at her reflection and asked, "Ma'am, is everything okay? Why didn't you leave with your boyfriend?" She finally began to move, her head turned towards my direction. "That wasn't my boyfriend," she shouted out so suddenly that it made my heart bang against my chest. "I can't go with him. Just please take me home." I looked at her and I noticed that black streaks formed down her face from the tears and makeup. The woman's red lipstick was smeared at the corner of her lips and the left lens of her glasses were slightly cracked. "Christ!" I yelled. "Did that man hurt you?" She sat there and stared back at me and placed her hand on my shoulder. "Please, take me home," she whispered under her breath. I didn't want to press the matter any further. I didn't know what was going on, and I'm just a damn Uber driver. I felt her hand shake on my shoulder. She was freezing cold. I let out a sigh and asked her where she lived. She took her hand off my shoulder and told me her address. Her house was in the completely opposite direction, about 40 minutes away. Great. I told her not to worry about paying. She had already had a bad night and I didn't want to pour salt into the wound with the ride fare. So, here was my night, taking a crying girl back home after what looks like a shitty date. We sat in silence for a while and I let her cry, her sobs barely a whisper underneath the sounds of my radio. I couldn't help but look back at her. She was very pretty despite all of what was going on. Did Dave hurt her? I was afraid to ask, but as we got closer to our destination, the questions were burning in the back of my head. I don't know what came over me. I wish I had kept my stupid mouth shut. But the words floated away from my lips. Did Dave hurt you? My question was met with cold silence that chilled the air around me. There was no sound of sobbing, no sound of movement, nothing at all coming from my back seat. A chill ran down my spine, freezing me in place as I looked in the rearview mirror to see that it was completely empty. I slammed on my brake again and shifted to park. I turned around to see that the car was empty aside from me driving it. My heart began to race, the thumping rocketed against my ribs, and I started to sweat despite how cold I felt. Where had she gone? Did she jump out of my fucking car? Was I losing my shit? I hopped out of my car in the middle of the empty road and looked all around. There was no sign of the woman in sight. In a frantic state, I even looked under my car. Of course, there was nothing there. I got back into the driver's seat and propped my head against the steering wheel. I clutched at my chest trying to calm myself down. There was no way that I had seen a ghost. That kind of stuff just doesn't happen in real life. My mind tried to rationalize what had just happened until I heard a whisper that felt like the person's voice was right next to my ear. "Please, take me home." I turned around to see nothing there, only an empty back seat of my locked car. My eyes shifted back to the rearview mirror to see the image of the girl in the center behind me. Parts of her hair fell over her cracked glasses. Blood was running down her chin to a neck covered in purple bruises. I just sat there and stared as she began to writhe in her seat like some kind of creature in a horror movie. The sounds of bone snapping echoing in my skull. Her arm snapped to grab the headrest of my seat and the one next to me, and she slowly pulled herself towards me. I turned to see her head was now next to mine, and I wanted to throw up at the sight before me. The left side of her head was crushed in, and I saw in the space a hole with fragments of her skull visible. Blood poured out and splashed onto my right shoulder. She turned her head towards me and she opened her mouth to show a bloodied mouth and missing teeth. "Take me home." A distorted howl came from what was left of her throat as the demand filled me with such horror, the sound much more frightening than what I was seeing before me. Without taking my gaze off her, I reached for the handle of the car door. Her eyes beneath the broken glass were bloodshot red and they darted to my left hand. Before I knew it, she had slithered into the front seat and pressed her hand into mine. She gripped her small bruised hands and I felt an immense pain run through my arm. She removed her hand to reveal what was left of mine. My fingers were broken at every joint. I let out a scream and she just looked at me, now with bloody tears streaming down her face. "Drive!" she howled again. My functioning hand, I turned the engine and continued to drive to her destination. There were only 10 minutes left with no one on the road. I wanted to leave, but I didn't think she would let me even if I tried. I kept driving despite the pain of my broken fingers, despite her bloody tears dripping onto me, despite the snapping noise of her neck as she tilted her head back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I couldn't help but think to myself, what did I do to deserve this? We were finally in front of a house, a simple house, a beautiful family home, and I slowed to a stop. I was shaking in my seat so badly as I looked at her staring at the house. I wanted her to go. I brought her to her destination, and then I shouted in my mind, "Please go!" But I sat there and stared at this entity next to me as it just stared out the window. She slowly turned her head back to me, and she was now back to how I first saw her, and she whispered to me, "I can never go home again." I blinked, and as soon as I opened my eyes, she was gone. I sat there for a moment longer, hoping that whoever was living here wouldn't see me parked outside their house like a weirdo. I looked at my left hand and it was normal. I looked all around myself in the car to find no bloodstains. "Fuck this," I shouted and sped off into the night back home. I thought that I had really snapped or something. I called my friends, parents, anyone who would just listen to me as I spouted out a lunatic story. I made them worry, of course. I spent the next couple of days locked in my room like some kind of madman. Then one of my friends sent me a recent news article and I nearly passed out at what I saw. The article was about a young woman who was found murdered in an alleyway. The woman that was inside my car. I didn't think of anything else but calling the police and told them what had happened. Of course, they didn't believe me about her being in the back seat, but they did believe me about Dave. There was a full-on investigation, but they couldn't find a trace of Dave. But to my dismay, they did find something in my car. On the floor of my back seat, they had found a memento that Dave must have left behind. Right behind my seat, lying on the floor of my car, were a pair of thin glasses with round frames. The lenses were broken and were stained with the young woman's blood. That was another amazing story. I have to say, the authors on the r/no sleep really are talented. I think I've said that several times. But I'm also quite privileged because I feel that this author is coming to be quite a friend of mine, and I hope to be able to continue reading their stories in the future. Now again, I will not waste your time with my jibber-jabbering, but I will like to wish you all the best of luck and hope that you are safe wherever you are. And as always, this is Grim, and I'm signing off.